Hey, did you know that only 4% of Americans ride public transportation? But surveys show that 84% of communities where it is support it. I'm Paul Comfort, and on this episode of Transit Unplugged, we dive into that number to try to explain why. And to help us find that answer, we talk to Mark Aesch. Mark is CEO of TransPro Consulting, and in this episode, he makes a powerful case that public transit should not be evaluated only on ridership, but also about its value to the community. He explains how that shifting our focus from volume or ridership to value better reflects what people actually want from their transit systems. And we're joined by Alvin McBorough. He is CEO of OGx Consulting, and he explores how transit agencies can harness the power of artificial intelligence or AI to make better decisions and better serve their communities. It's a powerful conversation you don't want to miss on today's episode of Transit Unplugged with Mark Aesch and Alvin McBorough. Enjoy. Great to be with two of my friends who are some of the best public transportation consultants in America, in my opinion, and that is Mark Aesch, who is the head of TransPro Consulting. Mark, welcome to the show.
Great to be on. Thanks for making time.
And my good friend Alvin McBorough, who is CEO of OGx Consulting. Alvin, welcome.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
As you know, normally we talk to transit executives, and once in a while we bring in people who I think can really help the industry from the private sector, and that's what this show is all about. Mark and I recently did a co-presentation at the invitation of Scott, who heads up CTAA, Scott Bogren, in San Diego at CTAA Expo. Mark and I have been friends for over a decade. I even had talked with him when I was CEO of the MTA in Baltimore. But hearing Mark talk about this topic of modernizing value for public transportation and making sure we're emphasizing the right things for success, it's all a game of expectations and what is it, that just spoke to me so much. And I said, Mark, we got to get this message out to a broader crowd. So I'm really happy to have you do that. And Alvin and I have been talking off and on for the last year or so about the role of AI, artificial intelligence in public transportation, and how we feel like a lot of transit agencies could do a lot more with less if they utilized AI even better. So I said, that's another message that I don't get a chance to talk to CEOs about. Because Mark, really, CEOs of transit agencies, and you were one in Rochester, New York, they're tied to the existing paradigm, right? So talk to us some about your background, Mark. Let's start off with you, and then just give us an intro to this topic.
Yeah, happy to. So I went to college, Paul, 100 years ago to study being in the TV news business, and did that for about 18 months and quickly learned that the only thing people in the TV news business do is talk about what someone else did. And I'm like, I want to be the one that's doing the doing. Like, I want to be the one that they're talking about, that they're producing different sets of results. And I believe that the transit agency that I was the CEO of for 8 years, we did things very differently. We pushed ourselves to ask very different questions. We thought about the differences of words, like what's the difference between customer service, which is an input, and customer satisfaction? Did I actually deliver the service in the right way to lead to a satisfied customer? People are quick to use the words, we need to measure our employee satisfaction. Well, do we mean employee satisfaction or do we mean employee engagement? Do we want the hearts and minds engaged, to produce maximum value? So to your point, all of that led to a lot of national news coverage. I wound up writing a book with the publishing wing of Walt Disney, and it was a logical jumping off point. I loved the work that we were doing, but it became, all right, smarty pants, like you could do that with one agency. Can you scale it? Could you begin to work with a number of like-minded, passionate executives to bring measurable performance to their agencies? And proud, we're celebrating our 15th year of doing that, to work with public sector executives that care deeply about their results.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Mark. I look forward to unpacking that even more in the next few moments. Alvin, let's move over to you. You're based out of Denver, right? Give us a little bit of your background and what you all do.
So I'm particularly on the opposite side of Mark. Started off not necessarily in TV, but pretty much working as a technologist. So prior to starting OGx Consulting, I used to be with Cisco Systems, primarily on the services side, where we will come into organizations, primarily come in with the understanding that, look, there were challenges that most clients were faced with, mostly C-level executives looking to scale their entire network or their entire solution platform. So as being part of Cisco Services, we were tasked with going in, trying to understand what the pain point was, creating some economic value for these stakeholders, and trying to help them scale and deliver that particular platform. So from the onset, one of the big things that I would like to say that we were part of earlier, this was the early onset of what we call at the time infrastructure as a service, which has now become what we call cloud computing. That's what everybody is referring to now. At the onset, Cisco was at the burgeoning stage of setting that whole industry up. And we were some of the pioneers at that early stage to be able to get this moving. So somewhere along the line, I decided that was just the right time to be able to make the pivot and focus on building something for myself. And this was when I was finishing up my MBA at the University of Chicago. So that's when I decided to make the pivot and just go directly into consulting. And hence we've come into this space that we love so much, especially public transit, where we see a ton of opportunities for us to be able to leverage some of the words of Mark, help our clients elevate their performance and also move them to the next level of how they can leverage technology, leverage strategy, leverage management philosophy, and how we can help them propel themselves to the front of the line. And they're doing a whole lot more with less at this particular point in time, something that we often talk about, Paul.
Thank you so much. The next round of questions will be, tell us more about how AI is being used or could be used. We'll talk about that in just a few moments. But let me swing back to Mark. You and I, as I said, met when I was at MTA in Baltimore, which was about 10 years ago, 8 to 10 years ago. And one of the first things I told the staff when I had a big staff meeting, MTA Baltimore is the 11th largest transit system in America. We had 5,000 employees and contractors and a lot of senior management. So I gathered all the senior management together because I came in as a change agent, not a cheerleader. And I told them, I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to make a difference. And I don't care about ridership. It's one of the first things I said to the team as a whole. I said, ridership is actually the one thing that we can't control. What we can focus on are other inputs, such as safety, efficiency, reliability. We called it back then customer service, world-class customer service, Disney style. I know you've got it even refined even further. Tell me what you think about that, and what are we getting wrong in the industry?
Well, there's a reason, Paul, that you and I are friends 10 years later, because we were one of the few that were singing out of the hymnal 10 years ago that ridership was a flawed concept. The fundamental point of it is that if ridership is the singular definition of success, we're not very good at it. Right? Ridership has been on a steady decline for 75 years. And the reality is, if you correlate ridership against one metric, it's very, very clear. If you go back decades, there's a singular metric that ties to public transportation ridership, and that is the price of a gallon of gas, something that we have no involvement in. And so we're tying the success of our industry to a metric that has no involvement with us whatsoever. And so, the point that I make is that if we're going to tie our success to two questions, number one, what is our ridership level? And second, what is our revenue level? How much public money can we get, put into our hands to deliver service? We don't control our own destiny. And so I have been quite loudly leading a conversation of how do we move the definition of success from one of volume to one of value. And I will never understand, and I'll continue to lead the conversation, that if serving more bad coffee is the definition of success, that's not a diner that I want to work, right? How do we serve amazing coffee like they do in San Antonio, highest customer satisfaction in the country? How do we serve amazing coffee so people want to invest in us to open more coffee shops? Toledo, Ohio is a great example. They embraced a model of measuring value. The voters passed overwhelmingly, providing them with more resources to open more coffee shops. And so I think we have example after example of agencies that have moved from the volume mindset to the measurable value mindset, not episodic storytelling, measurable value critically. And I'll put a bow on all this, Paul, to wrap. We have some national results that we've been tracking for 2 years now. Across the country, 4% of people in most communities use the public transportation system. But across the country, in most communities, 84% find value in their public transportation system, 20 times more. And so that 84%, right, they don't care if we move 4.1 or 4.2, like they don't care. They want us to bring measurable value. And how do we talk to that 84%?
Alvin, this is a perfect segue into what we're going to talk about next, which is how do we bring value? How can we use technology? I mean, I work for a technology company. That's our message every day. If you use technology effectively, you can help improve the lives of the people you're serving. How are we using AI? We're all just fooling around the edges with ChatGPT. How can transit systems use it to do what Mark is saying, which is provide improved value?
Oh, so absolutely. There are a ton of opportunities that when you look at artificial intelligence, or what we would call AI, for instance, is having transformational impact on public transportation sector, especially from around when you look at operational and safety improvements all the way to rider experience and long-term planning. There are a ton of opportunities that we see across the board. For instance, having been on the periphery of playing in this space for a couple of years now, we started off with it not being called AI, but at one point in time it was predictive analytics, data, all of those other things. But coming up to where we are right now, leveraging artificial intelligence and also machine learning, the way I usually like to look at it is in the bucket of four perspective. The first one is around the passenger experience. The next one will be around operational efficiency. The third one is going to be around safety and security. And the final one is just going to be around planning and policy. So within this construct, it's easy for us to take passenger experience, for instance. So asking the question about how public transportation agency can take advantage of that. For instance, if we look at real time, estimate time to arrival and alerts and all of these other things. Now there are some examples in the place, which I will certainly go into later on to be able to talk about the examples on how these other agencies are leveraging this now. People are now leveraging that to be able to be something that can help them predict if there is supposed to be a delayed, if there is supposed to be on-time arrival, how are they getting to that next level? When you look at chatbot, for instance, that's another big area, again, where we've seen a lot of agencies begin to leverage that. And this one, again, is basically helping the passengers help to plan them around their trips, answering the frequently asked questions, and also reporting on issues. If there is something that is there and I need to know, there is an alert, how can we easily get this one out? So on the passenger side, those are opportunities. On the operational side, as we've known for a long time, predictive maintenance has been one of these key things that has really hampered a lot of public transportation agencies. But most of them are now moving to this space where they're now beginning to predict, primarily now calling that AI, leveraging some AI algorithms that can easily predict if there is a machine or critical component within the system that's supposed to fail. When is the most likely time that will break? What kind of impact we can have on that? How your organization can easily get ready to be able to help prevent some of these things from happening. You can also look at route optimization as another area, again, where when you look at traffic and you look at ridership, how do we combine that data? How can we help better optimize route? Let's assume that a road is closed. What is the best step, again, for us to optimize our route? How can we alert our clients or our stakeholders, passengers, for instance, of early onset? Then when you look at it from the security perspective, again, there is a great example, again, that I would like to share. And I think this is a client of ours that is doing something like this with especially computer visioning, especially around surveillance. So that's another area, again, how you can easily leverage computer visioning to be able to surveil and how you can easily alert your stakeholders of if there's anything of concern that is in this space. Then from there, you can just also talk about planning. Now, artificial intelligence is giving us the opportunity and the capability for us to be able to plan well in advance, especially if we start looking at demand forecasting, for instance. I know Mark mentioned about the fact that we want to be able to forecast how many passengers we'll see along these lines. What are some of the things that we can look at it when it comes to ridership growth, incidents that we can identify, and how we can easily help propel our transit agencies to help prepare for them? That's another great area, again, where we've seen a lot. The final one that I would like to dwell on as part of planning would just be around the digital twin, for instance. And this one, again, is about leveraging simulation for us to help plan and project on future policies, if there are supposed to be opportunities there, if the impact here, let's assume that the impact from the FTA, we realize that there will be a little bit more less funding this year. So what is that impact going to be? How can we leverage the digital twin to be able to plan and prepare for that as well? So there are a ton of things that AI can possibly do, and I believe that this is the right time that public transit agencies should seriously consider artificial intelligence as one of those tools or one of those emerging technologies, as we'll call it, that will be able to help propel them to the front of the line if they want to continue to be sustainable and focusing on the right things that they need to be doing as well.
What do you think of that, Mark, the role of AI?
It's fascinating to think about, Paul, you and I are old enough that I think I've been through 3 generations of listening to the industry indicate that we have to quote unquote tell our story. And, to the point that I was making just a minute ago, that over here you've got 4%, right, in most communities that use. Over here you've got 84% that find value in the public transportation system. And the reality is we don't need to tell our story. We need to tell their story, right? Mm-hmm. That the 84% who live over here, what would a politician do with that, right? A politician would poll the community and they would talk not to the 4%, they would talk to the 84%. Mm-hmm. And I think to the point that Alvin's making, right? So that the 84% are very clear on why they see value. They're very clear on why it's 84%. Number one, public transportation connects people to jobs.
Yeah.
We should talk about connecting people to jobs. Number two, we provide service for people that are elderly and disabled. Mm-hmm. So maybe rather than complaining about the ADA as an unfunded mandate, maybe we embrace that as an opportunity.
Brother.
Because there's 84% over here, right? We talk to them. And the third reason that 84% is over here is that they believe that we provide low-income people with connectivity to jobs and education. And so I think the opportunity is not to talk about quote unquote choice riders, but to actually talk about that third element of value, which is how we connect people of lower income households to jobs. Let's be proud of that, not ashamed of it, and have choice rider conversations. So I think the point Alvin's making about AI is how do we talk to the 84% and the 3 reasons they find value, rather than this endless pursuit of how do we get 4% to be 4.1%. That's not how the 84% thinks about the value of public transportation. They don't care if it's 4.1 or 4.2. They care about jobs, helping people that are old and disabled, and connecting people of lower incomes to work. Let's use AI to have their conversation, not tell our story.
What do you think, Alvin?
Yeah, just to back on what Mark is saying is that if you recall, we have the Pareto principle, 20% of the outcomes that it's to drive 80% of what we're looking for comes from, 20% of the activities or 20% of the stakeholders that we need to be able to focus on. So again, leveraging this particular platform that we've come to embrace pretty well. I know most people see it through the lens of the first thing is ChatGPT or one of these other things of those nature that I'm using Anthropics, I'm using Google and all of these other elements. But I think if we look at it holistically, I think one of the industries that is sectors that we can focus on at this point that is well prepared for us to be able to move into the next level is the public transit space, because it gives us that opportunity now for us now, considering all of the challenges that we're confronted with. Right. Some of them, yes, it's been systemic, it's been historical. Others have just been, the recent activities with regards to changes in directions that you can see. So one of the areas here is that how can we, and this is something that we've been advising a lot of folks to take advantage of, is that how can you focus on leveraging the request for you to do more with less, right? So that's one area. So if I've been asked to do something like that, then you can go down the road and start considering the fact that, okay, if we want to be able to route our passenger experience, for instance, what are some of the things that we got to start thinking about? How can we make certain that we can easily drive our passenger experience to get us to the next level? So along that line, that's something, again, that you start looking at the data that we currently have in-house. Can we make sense of it? How can we assemble the data? How can we go out there and make sure that we can take a logical approach on how we can help implement AI across the entire industry?
All right. Mark, one of the best books I've read, I think, in the last 10 years is the book Freakonomics, which really talks about follow the money, follow the incentives. One of the lessons I learned out of it as a younger man was, realtors and whose interest do they really have? The realtor who's representing the seller is not there to represent you as the buyer. And so you and I are in alignment on the important things that we need to value, the 3 priorities of people, the 84%, and that we need to be speaking to that as a transit agency leader, just like a politician would, to win support, votes, etc. How do we incentivize those results?
Yeah, it's a great question. I thought the book was phenomenal as well. And I the realtor example sticks with me, Paul. I'm surprised to know what you and I are aligned. So to me, I think there's three elements of reform. You and I talked about this first one, right? So we've got to modernize the definition of value. This ridership and revenue mindset is not going to set the industry up, for sustainable success in the future. I think the second one, which is the question you're asking here, is how do we as an industry inspire the Federal Transit Administration to move from a compliance mindset to a performance mindset? So let me give an example of what I think that means. You will have the FTA, ask you 27 times a year if you've got happy buses. They'll ask you about state of good repair. They'll ask you about mean distance between failures. But you know what they won't ask you? Do your happy buses actually create happy customers, right? Like there's this over focus on, did you fill out all the forms properly? Did you use the number 2 pencil? Are you creating happy buses versus are you creating happy customers? And I'm very optimistic that Congressman Molinaro is really going to lead a reform, not incremental, lead a reform of the FTA to begin to think about outcomes versus inputs. So what do I mean by that? So this concept of, how long do you keep a bus and mean distance between failures and state of good repair? How do we move from whether my bus is on time or not to whether or not I've got happy customers? Let me give a specific example. Years ago at New York City Transit, all they could talk about in meetings was on-time performance. What's our on-time performance? How are we performing? What's our on-time performance? You know where the customer rated on-time performance and level of their happiness? 7. It was the 7th most important thing. So even if they became amazing at it and got to 100%, the impact on the outcome of customer satisfaction was going to be incremental. So I'll pick a real-time example in TriMet. 2 weeks ago, TriMet was recognized for having the most improved customer satisfaction in the country. Their customer sat in Portland went up 15% in 1 year. The best part of it, it went up on purpose. Like they actually worked on the right inputs in the right order to drive the outcome they desired of higher customer satisfaction. And so that recognition comes from really being able to think about those things. Let me make 2 points, Paul, which I think are critically important in this in regards to the incentives that you're talking about from this reform-minded FTA. The first is agencies receive federal aid in regards to quote unquote unlinked passenger trips. So what does that mean, unlinked passenger trips? That means if I can make you transfer, I get to count you twice. And if you have to transfer coming home, I've now moved the same person 4 times. So my incentive as an agency to get more money is to cause you to be unsatisfied. I'm going to make you transfer multiple times. If we took a plane and you could go straight from Baltimore to Tampa, you're like, I'm in. If you got to stop in Atlanta, you're like, what am I doing that for? We are incentivized to get more federal money to make people transfer. We actually did the analysis on this. You guys will find this amazing. A family of 3 that uses public transportation to go to and from work, run their errands, junior goes to high school, goes to practice afterwards, the FTA would tell you that family of 3 is 58,000 customers during the course of the year. It's a family of 3, right? So how do we begin to create so that the metrics are tied to that? The second one, there's a disconnect between the FTA funding and the way we provide service, is this concept of revenue miles. So agencies get federal aid based upon revenue miles. Drive more miles, get more aid. What that leads to is a fundamental disconnect between supply and demand. So over the last 10 years, industry-wide, demand is down 28%, supply is down 1%, because agencies are incentivized to run revenue miles as opposed to think about efficiency and value to the community. So I'm very hopeful that Congressman Molinaro is going to lead a discussion of how do we move from these input metrics that are incentivizing agencies to think about happy buses as opposed to incentivize them to think about happy customers and value to their community.
For those of you who don't know, Congressman Mark Molinaro is the FTA, the Federal Transit Administration Administrator nominee. And he's passed the Senate Banking Committee on a bipartisan vote. And as of the time of this recording, in early July, he still was yet up for a vote. But my understanding is, Mark, he's a special employee now, kind of working in there somewhat anyway.
Yeah, I have exactly that same counsel. And I'm optimistic based on watching the congressman's work when he was a county executive.
Oh, right. Dutchess County, New York, right?
Very performance focused, very outcomes focused. And I think as an industry to be able to have someone at the head of the FTA to really think about these questions from a non-traditional mindset and really think about how do we bring maximum value to the 4% and maximum value to the 84% that find value, I think the industry is going to find a friend in the former congressman.
Thank you. Alvin, as we wrap things up, give us a little more on just what Mark was talking about, is how we can use AI to help us tell that story, how we can take artificial intelligence, pull together the reams of data that are coming into a transit agency all the time, and maximize the messaging to the 84%. How can we use AI to tell our story better?
So, Paul, it is interesting that we just had this conversation and Mark raised the whole thing around performance. So one of the key areas here is primarily from the standpoint that, AI is data driven. So whatever inputs we have will become that particular piece that we can expect to get out of there. So based on that, I think that as we continue to go down this path and as we continue to think about it, AI would just be that enabler that we can definitely leverage for us now to become a little bit more data rich. I mean, in our environment, we're pretty much data rich, but literally we have the ability not to be able to execute on the data that we currently have at this particular point. So with us in adopting and embracing the whole tech concept or technology that we're embarking upon with AI, I would say that it gives us that ability for us now to position our agencies in a whole better light, because now we have the data for us to be able to back up our actions, especially if that's the new direction that we're hoping to get to, where we become more performance. We get pretty much incented for the performance that we're able to deliver. I think it's critical for us to be able to embrace it. So once again, going over some of the key areas that we've seen opportunities emerge around, like operational, excellence or operational improvement and efficiency, leveraging AI in that space. One of the key areas we'll begin to look at will be predictive maintenance. So again, we know that we have most public transit entities. We've been asked to be able to address the issue with MAP 21, the FAST Act, and how we can easily help optimize our assets. So if we're leveraging AI that can help us in the process of predicting when a machine is supposed to fail, when a part is supposed to go down, how soon can we replace that? I think that there will be enough incentive for us to be able to leverage that data to help position us, and we can prepare for that particular one. Another area, again, that we got to also look at will be around passenger improvement. So is there a way that we can enhance the passenger experience when they're riding our buses or our multiple modes of transit? And if the answer is yes, how can we, from the onset, is there a logical way that we can provide them with the relevant space for them to be able to interact with our agencies, even through chatbot, for instance? If they can easily ask these frequently asked questions, when will my bus be here? How soon do I have to wait? When is the next connecting? All of these things, if it's on time, we believe that that will be able to enhance the experience again for our passengers. And that becomes another opportunity again for them to say that they want to be able to participate and get more on the public transportation route, for them to be able to do that. Then safety, again, is another big area. And if that's another issue, again, if we're leveraging things like the computer vision, for instance, leveraging the data from there for us to be able to prepare, not only just for the passenger experience, but from a safety perspective, that we can easily leverage some things along artificial intelligence that can help prevent incidents from happening to our passengers, that we can minimize those. I think it becomes another great area again. And also just from a planning perspective, that's another place that I would say that even from a policy and planning perspective, that's another area if we start focusing on, it helps us to be able to, with the relevant data that we currently have, we can now focus on the future demand. We can forecast our current needs and how we can better prepare for long and short-term planning with respect to that, because we have the relevant data that is helping to guide us to the next level for how these decision makers within public transit will be able to make the relevant decisions at that particular point in time.
Paul, just a quick comment on that, if I can. I would argue to the point that Alvin's making that as an industry, we are data rich and information poor. Mm-hmm. And I think the question is, how do we take all of that data and use it to arrive at the top line. So let me use an example to illustrate that. You don't measure whether Tom Brady, threw a number of touchdown passes or was able to run the ball really fast, or how much weight he can lift, or did he eat the right nutrition? Did he score enough points to win on Sunday? Like, that's the measurement of success.
Yeah.
And we can move, as Alvin's suggesting, from this data-rich environment to actually thinking about information and results. The fact that we require a transit agency in Montana and Manhattan to measure the same things is silly. And how do we make sure we measure what matters to bring value to the communities that we represent? Sacramento is going to think about outcomes different than Syracuse is. So if they're going to think about outcomes in a different way, guess what? They're going to measure things in a different way to produce those outcomes. Are you a running offense? Do you pass the ball? Do you run the option? And so we have to allow agencies to have individuality in what they measure to produce outcomes and begin to tie federal aid to being good and what you committed to being good at, right? Like, everyone's going to think about value in a different fashion.
Well, thank you both, Mark Aesch, Alvin McBorough. Thank you for sharing some of your insights with us that are actionable, I think, for transit agencies. The idea that ridership cannot and should not be the primary indicator of our success, because it's not necessarily what's valued by the majority of the people in a community. That's what I'm hearing from you, Mark. And Alvin, what I'm hearing from you is we can use artificial intelligence more than we are now in transit agencies to produce better outcomes for the communities that we serve. I think those messages tie together so well. Thank you both for the work you do. If you want to hear more from Mark or Alvin, we'll put their contact information, their websites on our show notes, and you can reach out to them directly if you'd like any input from them on your specific agency. Thank you both again for being here and for the work you're doing for our industry.
Thank you, Paul.
Oh, great to see you, Alvin.
Thank you, Mark. Have a good day.
Thanks for listening to Transit Unplugged. I'm executive producer Julie Gates, and this episode was created by host and producer Paul Comfort, producer Chris O'Keefe, associate producer Cindy Raskin, and podcast intern Des Gates. Transit Unplugged is being brought to you by Midaxo, passionate about moving the world's people. If you want to dive deeper behind the transit headlines and get boots on the ground intel on important updates like the Trump administration's transit priorities or how to get funding, check out Transit Unplugged Insider, our new YouTube show, where Paul and I take you inside today's hot topics. Paul knows what's going on in Washington, D.C. and has the inside scoop. He's taking a lot of meetings with a lot of people, and we want to make sure you know what's going on. You can watch and subscribe to Transit Unplugged Insider on the Transit Unplugged podcast page on YouTube. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Transit Unplugged.